the best of the week on Relevant Radio.
888-914-9149. Let's go to Dominic now in Roswell, New Mexico. Hi, Dominic.
Hey, Patrick. I was calling because the last couple of weeks at Mass, whenever the reading was about Jonah, the priest said that, remember, this is not a literal story. It's just a story. And then whenever it was about Job, he said the same thing, that it was not a literal story. It was just a story. And so I was wondering, I always believed it was literal, so.
Yeah, well, let's take them in order. So let's start with Jonah. Jonah is, or was, I should say, a real historical personage. And the way we can know this is not simply because of the book of Jonah, which we read about him going to Nineveh and being swallowed by the fish and all that, but more importantly, because Jesus references him on several occasions as an actual historical figure. So it is a trend in some circles in biblical studies to, sometimes the term that's used is demystified, or to try to say that, well, this wasn't really a miracle. This didn't really happen. Jesus didn't really, for example, multiply loaves and fish to feed 10,000 people. The real miracle is that they shared their food. No, sharing your food is not a miracle. So this is an artifact of that wing of biblical studies, which says that these people, Noah, I mean, Adam and Eve for that matter in some cases, but Noah and Jonah and things like that they're just devices that were used to tell moral tales, and they weren't real. But Jesus says otherwise. Jesus refers in Matthew 12, for example, for just as Jonah was 3 days and 3 nights in the belly of the great fish, so will the Son of Man be 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth. Luke chapter 11, verse 30, for as Jonah became a sign to the people of Nineveh, so will the Son of Man be to this generation. And Jesus was anything but mythical. He was anything but, just a literary device. He was real, and he really did go in the tomb for portions, at least, of 3 days and 3 nights. So Jesus refers to Jonah as an historical figure and connects him with himself. He does this also with Noah. And he talks about, just as it was in the days of Noah, when the flood came and swept them all away, so will it be when the Son of Man returns. So I think those are some important aspects that we can buttress the church's age-old belief that these are indeed historical figures, notwithstanding the things that some people say. And then also we can take a look at the church fathers. So the church fathers exegeted these passages, and in some cases they would exegete books, even like the book of Job, for example, and say, well, this is a moral tale. It didn't necessarily happen to an actual person, although that's possible. But in the case of Jonah, they universally recognized him as a real historical personage, the same with Noah, for example. So those are some of the things that you should know when you're evaluating something like that. Otherwise, people can say, well, none of this stuff is actually really true. It's just stories to try to get a point across. But that's not what the church teaches.
Okay.
Yeah, as far as Job is concerned, right. Let me tell you what Father Ken Baker says in this book I referenced earlier called Inside the Bible. So he says, the author of Job is unknown, but he was a learned, profound poet. The problem dealt with and the language point to a time of composition after the exile, that is, after 538 BC, and it was probably composed between 500 and 400 BC. Now, there are all sorts of manuscript evidence reasons to say that. He says, the book of Job offers the most profound treatment of the problem of evil that is to be found in world literature. And he talks about the themes, and the summary, he says, is, in the prose dialogue in the first 2 chapters, we learn that Job, a wealthy and pious man, has been deprived of his children and all his possessions, and he's afflicted with a serious disease, and it goes on from there. We don't know with certitude, was this an actual man? Like Jonah was an actual man, or Noah was an actual man. Was Job an actual man? It's possible, but as I understand it anyway, the preponderance of patristic testimony doesn't seem conclusive one way or the other. It seems that we could reasonably assume that, like the Song of Songs, the people speaking to each other, the lovers speaking to each other in the Song of Songs, were not necessarily an actual man and a woman having this conversation, but the biblical author was writing it in the form of a conversation between the two lovers. So this could be a book like that, where Job is being used to describe, a what-if kind of scenario. But he could also very easily have been an actual human being. Thank you, Dominic. Appreciate that. Like what you just heard? Share it with your family and friends. And thanks for listening.